Hello there, Seaside Shadows. This is Laura coming at you with Witchy Wednesday. I am your historian and witch for today, and I am going to be telling you, funnily enough, about witch bottles. Now, that may sound like something that's a bit dark, a bit strange, but it's actually something that is very light, and it's something that was used by many different types of religions in England and America. And I'm going to be telling you all about what witch bottles are, the history of them, kind of the folklore and how they're similar to actually other folklore of different countries, and also places that they were found in America and England, some examples of them. And of course, we are going to be telling you about how to make them, but also because this is a historical artifact, I'm going to be telling you about what to do if you indeed find one, which would be a very rare thing indeed if you're in America, and I would love to hear if you do have indeed a witch bottle. Now first, let me tell you what a witch bottle actually is. Now, a witch bottle is a bottle, and there is a few different types of things that can go inside it. The bottle itself can vary. So the history of the witch bottle is it began in the 16th century. It is used up until today, so the type of bottle can depend. It can be an earthenware type bottle or sort of vessel. It can be stoneware, it can be glass, it can be a vial, it can be a jug. So there are different types of vessels it can be in, and I do have examples of these different types of vessels. I do not have a complete set, as I only have pottery shards. It was very hard to transport 17th century full earthenware jugs from England to America, so I unfortunately only have shards for you, but they are in a very nice display. So most common when you find witch bottles in England, they will be in 17th or 18th century vessels. That seems to be when they are most concerned about witches. And this is the typical type of pottery that you'll find them in. This is about 17th century and early 18th century. Sometimes 18th century will look like this, but most often you'll find them in this type of stoneware pottery. This is Victorian. Sometimes you will find shards of pottery in glass vials that look like this, but this is not a vial or a glass. This is actually plate. But you do find shards inside of these bottles. I'll be telling you why in a second. But do keep an eye out if you do live in England. Look for shards that look like that. It could be part of a witch bottle. You never know. So, as I mentioned before, there are shards of things inside of these bottles. Now, there is a good reason for that. The theory was that this bottle contained what you needed to get rid of witches, hence the name witch bottle, but it could also get rid of ill will, it could get rid of the evil eye, it could get rid of bad energy, or it could just get rid of any bad luck. If you're a farmer and you're having bad crop, you may think it's a witch, or you may think you're just having a spot of bad luck. In any case, you would make a witch bottle, or you might get someone to make one for you, maybe the local cunning folk, as they were called. Now, I have a list here of items that were actually found in historical witch bottles, and some of them, fair warning, are a bit gross, but it is historically accurate, and if you do want to make a historically accurate witch bottle, you can use this. It's fine if you don't want to. You can substitute with other items. So here's a list of things that were actually found in historical witch bottles. So we have, for liquid, urine, red wine, port, seawater, plain water, blood, vinegar, and oil. Now, you can use any variety of this. I'll explain the different types that you can use and if any is better than the other. And the liquid was used kind of to drown the bad energy in its tracks. You could also use a thread, and the thread would kind of succeed in keeping down that bad energy and keeping it drowned in that liquid. And most often you would use a knotted red thread. Red thread, and especially a knotted form, comes up time and time and again in a lot of historical witchcraft. So if you're so inclined, you may use that. Other types of things found in these historic bottles were earth, sand, and stones. There was also other organic matter. There was feathers, herbs, flowers, thorns, shells, salt, ashes, wood, bone, teeth, hair, and nail clippings. And it's interesting to note that the teeth and bone is of the animal variety as well as the human variety. So take that as you will. There are also man-made objects in these witch bottles. Now, I did talk about the fairies last time I was on Witchy Wednesday, and I mentioned that iron seemed to be something that was driving away a lot of fairies and that it was very powerful. It seems that that does come back into play in witch bottles as well, because that is something that is recommended, especially iron nails. So you could put iron nails inside a witch bottle. They have also found coins, fish hooks, needles, pins, glass, the red thread again, and cloth hearts, which were often pierced by the nails or the needles. So as I said, the liquid was what drowned this bad luck. We had the thread, which would sometimes tangle it up. And then I noticed that they had a lot of those sharp objects, and a lot of historians say it's because that would impale that bad luck, keeping it in the liquid even if it was already drowned. And then the herbs seemed to be kind of the sprinkle on top of all of this, and that was something to drive away the bad luck ultimately. And where we would find these witch bottles with all of that inside of it is a lot of different places. So oftentimes they were found underneath the foundation of a home. Sometimes they were found underneath the floorboards, in the foundation itself. The farthest most point of your property was sometimes a place where you would bury it. Other times you would put it under a threshold or a doorway. Other times it was near the hearth, either underneath or next to the chimney, because it is said that the heat would actually make it more effective. That's something we will talk about in a moment. It was also found in ditches, by riversides, as well as being thrown into the fire itself. Sometimes you were able to throw it into the fire, and if it was said to burst, then you were free of your bad luck forever. Sometimes this worked, sometimes this didn't. Sometimes it did work, but you still had your bad luck. In one case I did read said that they had to try a different method even though they did use the fire method. So that's kind of the history of what the witch bottle is, and I will have some props to show you later of some objects that you can put in your witch bottles. But let's kind of talk about the history of these witch bottles, because they didn't just come about on their own. As I mentioned, it came about in the 16th century, and that was kind of the beginning of the witch panic. A lot of people think it began in the 17th century, which is when the Salem witch trials began. It was kind of a big explosion. King James I of England and Scotland and Wales and all that fun stuff, he was really big on anti-witchcraft. But it did begin earlier than that, with the suspicions of witchcraft in the 16th century in the United Kingdom. And specifically, it began in East Anglia, that region of England. They were very suspicious of witches, and it appears that this is the origin of those witch bottles, and it spread from there. It appears it did not spread to Scotland or Wales. It was just concentrated in England specifically, but it was brought over to the Americas, to the colonies, and sometimes it is practiced to this very day. Now, it is found in a lot of different places, as I mentioned, and it does vary from place to place. As I mentioned in my description, it can actually be found in places of faith. So they have found witch bottles in churches, they have found them in inns, they found them in homes, they found them in colleges, and in America, which was known to be a very Puritan society, they have found them in places that were associated with kind of stricter religions. In fact, one of the witch bottles I am going to be discussing was found on the property of a Quaker, and when it was dated, it was found that it was placed when the Quakers were residing there. So it is indicative of the fact that many religions would use the witch bottles, and it was not so much something to do with their faith so much as their folklore, which is another thing I will get into, is the similarities with a lot of different folklore. So, A lot of people watching this are probably from New England. Some of you might have heard about the legend of the shoes in the wall. Well, I can confirm that is something that actually happens. People do find shoes in the walls of their historic homes very often. I have an aunt who actually found over a dozen shoes in her wall. That is because it was considered a sign of good fortune, good luck, keeping away the bad spirits if you put it inside of your wall. It's not that someone locked up a bunch of people inside the walls when they were building it. It's simply something that was attributed to New England folklore. And it's not something that has to do with their religion. Again, as I was talking about the fairies in my last Witchy Wednesday, it's just something that we do. It's like knocking on wood. It's like hanging a horseshoe over your door. It's just something associated with our New England folklore. So this is something that people would do. And they would put the shoes in the wall because they thought it would ward off the bad luck. They'd put the witch bottle underneath the floorboards because they thought it would drive away the witches. There was also something called witch marks, or they also have another scientific name for it, which is, I'm going to try to pronounce this, I'm sorry, I'm not just going to pronounce that. There's a scientific name for it. I'm just going to call it witch marks because it sounds better anyway. Witch marks are actually marks that you would put underneath your floorboards or near the hearth, so very similar to the witch bottles. Sometimes these witch marks are found accompanying the witch bottles. And I do have some examples to show you. One of them is extremely exciting for me because this was actually found at a site I was working at, and I was working at the site while the witch mark was discovered, so it was a very exciting time for us in the office when they found it. And this was found when they were renovating the attic and some of the rooms of this site. It's called Knoll House. It's one of the largest manor homes in England. And this is one of the witch marks. Witch marks can vary depending on where you're going. This is something that's fairly common. A lot of slash marks are seen. So this is an example of one of them. So that's a witch mark, sometimes seen accompanying these witch bottles. There is also another one. Again, I seem to attract these because this is also found at a place I worked at the Tower of London. This is a witch mark that was found at the tower. So again, if you have witch marks, maybe an indication you have a witch bottle in your house. You never know. So again, there's a lot of folklore around these witches with the witch bottles, with the witch marks, with the shoes in the wall. With New England and with England, they have all these traditions, and if you have one, you probably have the other, so you have to keep an eye out for that. And we do have some interesting accounts that I have found of the witch bottles, including one from the 17th century. So this is from 1681. It was in Suffolk, England, and this is an account of a witch bottle. And I mentioned before that you can throw it into the fire, but it sometimes doesn't work, and this was an account of one that apparently did not work. This was written in a book by Joseph Glanville, and it was called Evidence Concerning Witches and Apparitions. Sounds like my kind of book. And in it, he describes a wife that had taken ill, and oftentimes this was seen as something that a witch would do, or it was just seen as you have attracted the bad luck and you need to get rid of it. So an evil had plagued her somehow. Something had happened, you need to get rid of it, let's make a witch bottle. She advised to make one, and it describes putting her urine in it, putting pins, needles, nails, all that kind of thing to impale the bad luck. She puts it into the fire, nice and sealed tight, and attempts to make it burst from the heat and from the pressure. And she tries and she tries and she tries, and finally, after many attempts, she makes it burst, and she thinks, goodness, finally, my luck has come, my illness is over, hallelujah. Well, the author then hears that she is still ill, and he comes back and he said, what's the problem? And she says, I'm still ill, I don't know what to do. And the author says, well, you should try doing something else. You should try burying it, for that is another thing that you can do with these witch bottles. You bury it in the farthest part of your property. So she tries that. She does another witch bottle, does the same thing, the urine, the pins, the needles, the nails. She buries it on her property. The next day, she feels very well. She's no longer ill, except her husband suddenly drops dead. For it is said that apparently her husband was the one that was bewitching her the entire time. So there you have one interesting account of these witch bottles. Whether it is to be believed or not, it is an account that was written down, and you can look it up if you wish. It is Evidence Concerning Witches and Apparitions. It's a very fun read, actually, if you're interested in that subject. But now I can get into the archaeological evidence of witch bottles, which is always very exciting because that's how I know what's in these witch bottles, and that's how I can tell you what you can put in yours. So I'll start with America, which is exciting because I know a lot of you watching live there, but unfortunately there are not a lot. But it is kind of exciting because I get to tell you all about it, and maybe you know someone or you yourself know that there may be a witch bottle in your house, and you can take a look for yourself. So in America, about a dozen have been found so far, but more are becoming discovered every couple of years or so. The most recent one I could find was found a couple of years ago in Virginia, and that was found by the College of William and Mary. And I have the name of it. It was called the Redoubt 9 Witch Bottle, and that's because it was found in the Redoubt 9 area, and it was during the digging of a new highway, which unfortunately happens a lot with archaeology. Luckily, they were able to look into this site, which was a former Confederate fortification which was taken over by Union soldiers, and the year was 1862. Now that is very important because that actually helps to date the witch bottle, because you could think, well, perhaps it was Confederate soldiers that made the witch bottle, but they actually dated the witch bottle to past 1862, and it was discovered that it was formulated in Pennsylvania. Confederate soldiers probably wouldn't have something from Pennsylvania. So it was deduced that the Union soldiers had created this witch bottle that was found, and it was actually placed underneath the hearth at this fortification. So that's in the 1800s. This is still happening later on after the whole witchcraft panic. And the College of William and Mary came out and said they believed that this witch bottle was made, which was a glass bottle with some nails in it and possibly urine, and that was made because they were all alone in enemy territory, and they were concerned, and they were scared that they were going to get some sort of bad luck, and they were going to have some energy coming their way that was not good, and they wanted all the protection they could get, even if it was considered superstitious. So this is really fascinating stuff, that something fairly modern was actually still happening in America with this witch bottle, well past the Salem witch trials. And then we have another one that's equally fascinating called the Essington witch bottle, and that's in Pennsylvania. And that comes from the 18th century, and this one is also very bizarre. This was a glass bottle that was buried upside down, and below it there was a shard of pottery and a bone of a bird. And inside of this glass bottle was urine and 6 pins. You sense a theme with these witch bottles. And what is very fascinating about this is, as I mentioned previously, this glass bottle was placed by Quakers. Now, Quakers are known to be fairly strict in their religious beliefs, but they're still not strict enough to not believe in the witch bottles. So these Quakers placed it, and it's interesting that they have this cultural context of placing the bone, which is something that you might see as heathen, something you might see as pagan. So you have to wonder, is it possible that their native neighbors may have had an influence on them? And they may thought, will this make it stronger? Will their heathen ways make the witch bottle stronger? Or will it just help with the witchcraft because they themselves practice something that might be considered witchcraft? We may never know, but that is something to take into consideration, is the cultural context and is the location of where these witch bottles are found. Now, moving on to England, we do have a lot more witch bottles that are found in England. Over 200 are found, and it's a very exciting time for witch bottles. The Museum of London has just launched a campaign last year to find witch bottles. If you think that you have a witch bottle in England, please contact them because they are looking for them. They want to analyze every single one in the United Kingdom. They want to put it in a database. They're not going to take it away from you. They just want to take a look at it. I have an email here if you want to email them. I'll tell you about it later. But first, I just want to tell you kind of an example of what you might be able to find. So we have one called the Watford Witch Bottle. This was a glass bottle with an unidentified liquid. It had fish hooks, which, again, the context, it was found near a river, so a fisherman probably put his fish hooks in there. And it had human teeth in it. Don't know why that was in there, but they thought that it might work. And that was found in a 19th century inn behind a chimney. We also have one called the Holywell Witch Bottle that was found in an early 18th century house in London, and that was found underneath the floor. That was quite fascinating because it was a stoneware bottle, and it had 60 bent copper pins, rusty nails, wood and or bone, and probably had urine in it. And that is in the possession of the Museum of London, so you can actually go and check out their collections online if you want to look at the Holywell bottle. But onto if you find one of these bottles. Now, do not do what someone did in 2016. I will read you an account of what this person did, and please never do this. In 2016, a glass bottle found buried in the threshold of a man's house was featured in an episode of Antiques Roadshow, filmed in Cornwall. Glass specialists tasted a small amount of the contents, theorizing it was possibly wine, but it did have a rusty flavor, so it possibly had the presence of nails. Later, in 2019, they tested the contents of the same glass bottle. It actually contained urine, a tiny bit of alcohol, and human hair. So please, if you find a witch bottle, do not open it and taste the liquid inside. It's probably not alcohol. It's probably urine. So if you find one, first, don't open it, don't taste it. Second, leave it where it is. This is the most important thing because context is key. Leave it where it is and contact your local major university. For instance, if you're in Connecticut and you think you found a witch bottle or you've already found one, you stuffed it in your attic somewhere, please call Yale. Please call Harvard. Please call someone that you know. UConn has a great archaeology program. Call them. Do something. If you're in the United Kingdom, call your local finds liaison officer. And then contact, I have the email here, witchbottles@mola, mola.org.uk. So that's what you do if you find one. That's my little rant for today. It's very important for us so we can learn more about it. After all, we are historians. That's how I'm telling you about these witch bottles. So, that in mind, let's tell you how to actually make one of these. Now, this is a fun fact. The last officially reported witch bottle that was found by archaeologists was made in 1982 and was found in 1988 in London by the Museum of London Archaeology by the Thames. It was in a medicine bottle and contained a halfpenny, a dime, teeth, a wrapped piece of metal, and oil. So, you don't have to feel weird if you decide to make one right now. It is something that is still done to this day. I still make witch bottles. I will be making some for the store, which I'll be hawking at the end if you would like some. And if you want to be historically accurate, I do have a fun recipe I found for everyone. This is from Joseph Blagrave's Astrological Practice of Physic. It's from 1671, so it's very accurate. He states, another way is to stop the urine of the patient, which just means to collect it, close it up in a bottle, put into it 3 nails, pins, or needles. With it, a little white salt, keeping the urine always warm. If you let it remain long in the bottle, it will endanger the witch's life. For I have found by experience that they will be grievously tormented by making their water with great difficulty. It means they'll have trouble going to the bathroom. The more trouble they will have if the moon be in Scorpio and square or opposition to his signifier when it's done. So if you like to follow that recipe, you are more than welcome to. That is a 17th century recipe. You can use a variety of containers. If you want to be historically accurate, you can find a stoneware jug, you can find a glass vial. Again, cultural context is interesting because the archaeological evidence tells us not only the date according to the pottery, but the social status of the person. It also tells us if they're sentimental or not. Sometimes you can find that a more modern person in the 18th century is using a 17th century bottle, which is quite interesting. And again, I will read you what you can use for your witch bottle. These are from actual witch bottles. So again, decide to use what you will. You can use urine, red wine, port, seawater, plain water, blood, vinegar, oil, earth, sand, stones, feathers, herbs, flowers, thorns, shells, salt, ashes, wood, bone, teeth, hair, nail clippings, coins, fish hooks, nails, needles, pins, glass, red thread, or cloth hearts. I have some examples for you if you want to take a look. I'm sorry about the sun. I have teeth here. These are from a sheep. Don't worry, these are historical artifacts. These are not. These are ethical. These are very old. I do have shards of clay, which you can use, shards of pottery. This is a shard from a Victorian plate. This is a bone from a miscellaneous 17th century animal. And again, the iron comes in handy. Iron is very good against protection of evil, according to those historical people. This is a nice heavy-duty iron hook. But if you do not wish to make your own witch bottle, we do have some for sale in our store coming up very soon. We do make them according to the old tradition, so we use force fire to collect the ashes. They have naturally fallen rowan if you wish to have wood in your witch bottle. I am going to be making historically accurate witch bottles based on witch bottles that have been found, some of the more famous ones. And I will be making custom ones, so if you have a special request or if you have a problem, I can make them custom for you. So that is your Witch Bottle 101. It's not something that's very well known, but I think it's just a fascinating bit of New England lore, a bit of English lore, and it's something that is a very exciting topic to talk about because of this new campaign by the Museum of London, because of the fact there's still so many to find. So again, keep on the lookout if you have a historic house. If you are the manager of a museum, keep a lookout. If you wish to make one yourself. Again, if you want any more instructions, we're always here to help you. But otherwise, thank you very much for joining me today for this Witchy Wednesday. Every Wednesday at 5:30 we will have segments like this. So thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you next time.